Say that if you looked at his albums, there was always one track which anticipates what he's going to do next time round. And I think in the case of Station to Station, it was the title track.
Station to Station, the track, perhaps stands outside the rest of the Station to Station album, indeed, because on that album it's a chillier Young Americans. It's a very cold version, a very metallic version of the Plastic Soul he'd come up with triumphantly on Young Americans. Station to Station itself, the track, however, is a 10-minute extended workout of various rhythms, various ideas, various notions.
The cold, alienated atmosphere of the album also reflected Bowie's mental state at the time, isolated in Hollywood in the throes of cocaine addiction.
Cocaine numbs the emotional side of you. It kills you emotionally and it kills you spiritually, and I think you can hear that in that album.
He was just holed up in this mansion in LA, living on virtually nothing except what he was snorting up or whatever, having his assistant pretty much kind of fend off and decide who got access to him and who didn't. And it was a kind of very typical 70s lifestyle. Coke was very much the kind of drug du jour.
He'd got everything he'd wanted. I mean, bear in mind, he had tried for at least a decade before he broke through in Britain with Hunky Dory and Ziggy Stardust. And then, it was almost like, be careful what you wish for, because he created something he had to get out of in Britain. He went over to America and suddenly, through Diamond Dogs and especially Young Americans, suddenly became, America's favourite alien.
Bowie's fragile mental state was also resulting in a number of disturbing fascinations, most notably a flirtation with Nazi imagery.
The problem with Station to Station for most people, it was at a time when Bowie was absolutely fixated with Nietzsche and the right-wing ideas, political ideas.
He was not a well man, by his own admission. He's not proud of the period. He discussed matters of fascism, and I think it was to an extent picked up on as a faux pas by the press and blown out of all proportion.
When he started touring that album, when he came to England in '76, of course he arrived at Victoria Station, and there was this black Mercedes with the ones that the SS used to use, waiting for him, and all the fans were there, and at the end of the fans, he said he waved, but he didn't wave. He gave a Nazi salute, and people were appalled at this.
For our generation, our parents, there was an impossibility of finding anything in the Nazi aesthetic which was in any way acceptable. But at the same time, there it was, and there was something romantic and appealing about the tragedy of what had happened to Germany that Bowie was playing with, and playing with a bit too closely, I think.
I think I've always thought that an artist should remain apolitical, and if anything, if there are aspects that he doesn't agree with, then to caricature them more than anything else. So this is what I've always tried to do.
Still very much in the public eye, Bowie staged a couple of sell-out shows at Wembley. Both concerts were attended by musician and producer Brian Eno.
Eno was a very interesting character by sort of '76, and it's difficult, I think, for people to remember that. Certainly people who weren't there now, where he's this sort of mercurial boffin, pop boffin. He was a pop star. He was a glam rock star. He had been in Roxy Music. He was feted by the British press.
Brian had an interesting trajectory in that he was at art school at an interesting time in the late 60s, so open to many different influences. He became involved in the experimental music scene, but then he joined Roxy Music, and they have pop success, but they're quite experimental.
The early sort of glam pop sort of iconic highlights of Eno sort of twiddling away on this analog synthesizer in the background with Roxy Music on top of the pop looking the most kind of garishly blonde and effeminate of the lot of them. But he then went on to create his label, obscure label.
And he called me up and he said he was starting a label and did I want to record for the label. I had a record, I had one side, and a friend of mine, Max Eastley, who's a sound sculptor, had the other side, and that was one of the first 4 releases on Obscure in 1975. Brian produced those records. He was A&R as well. You know, it was his label. He chose the people, and I think if you look back, it was incredible A&R decisions. You know, Gavin Bryars, John Adams, Michael Nyman, all of the people who he chose are still around. They still have very active careers.
Bowie and Eno's meeting in 1976, however, would not be the first time their paths had crossed.
In the early 70s, about 1970, Philip Glass came to the Royal College of Art in London and did a performance of Music with Changing Parts, one of his early pieces. And it was minimalistic movies, basically tripart harmony repeated over and over and over. Eno was fascinated with minimalism, and a lot of his career in art college was based on doing minimalist La Monte Young and various minimalist pieces performed as art pieces. He went to this concert and he was shocked to meet David Bowie there. David Bowie was there at the concert because he was interested as well. At Wembley, he met Eno backstage, and then later in Paris, Eno went backstage again to talk to David. And these discussions said, well, maybe we can do something.
When they buddied up again in the mid-70s, there was a sort of mutual flattery society between Bowie and Eno. They had known each other because Roxy Music had supported Bowie on tour back in the day. Bowie praised discreet music to the hilt. Eno has said himself since that he was charmed by the flattery, which a lot of people have said about David Bowie, that he is an impeccable flatterer who brings people on side by praising their work when they're expecting to walk in and have to praise his work.
Both artists had been developing steadily over the 70s. While Bowie had taken a more American route, Brian Eno's work had seen him collaborating with a number of bands based in Berlin and surrounding Germany.
There was a lot of interesting music coming from Germany, and it became crassly known as krautrock. But then the performers like the Noise and the Clusters and things like that, they quite enjoyed that title. And you had Tangerine Dream sort of on the more sort of ambient side. Faust were around. And also, I mean, not from Berlin, but Kraftwerk were like listening to the future.
In Vienna, we sit in a late night cafe. Straight connection.
People use this term krautrock, but I don't know what that means, apart from the fact that it's kind of insulting. It sums up something that was so diverse.
There wasn't just one scene. I mean, Germany, nowadays people think that what they call krautrock is part of artists working together. There were different scenes in Düsseldorf, complete different music to that of Munich and Berlin. And we didn't even exchange much information. Everybody was concentrating on developing their own music.
I am quite sure that most of the groups really worked apart from the other groups. And a lot of Berlin groups also left Berlin, because at this time Berlin was quite like an island.
At this point, Eno had most notably recorded with Harmonia, a supergroup collective featuring members of German bands